is Shivaprakash. A few words about him. He is an eminent Kannada poet and playwright. He is the author of 6 books of poems, 9 plays, 2 books of criticism, and he has also edited several works. He was the editor of the prestigious literary bi-monthly journal of the Sahitya Akademi, Indian Literature. He is the recipient of the Sahitya Akademi Award, Sangeet Natak Akademi Award, Karnataka Academy Award, Karnataka Sahitya Akademi Best Book Prize 4 times, Karnataka Rajya Utsav Award and Fellowship from Ministry of Human Resources Development for Literature. He has also directed several plays in English, Urdu and Hindustani. He has served a deputation as Councillor, Culture and Education, directed the Tagore Center, Embassy of India in Berlin. At present, he is the professor at the Department of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And so I think Professor N. Kalyan and Professor Shafey Kidwai. Professor N. Kalyan Raman is a translator of contemporary fiction and poetry in Tamil into English. He has so far published 9 volumes of Tamil fiction in translation. His poetry translations have appeared in several anthologies of literature in Indian languages and in journals. He is also a regular contributor of book reviews and essays on literature and public policy to different newspapers and magazines. He served as professor of new media journalism in a J school and as head of program content research in a Tamil infotainment channel. He is the recipient of the Katha Translation Award. I welcome you, Professor Raman. I also welcome Professor Shafey Kidwai. He is an eminent Urdu critic and translator. He has several published books to his credit, including translated books from English into Urdu. He has contributed more than 70 research papers and participated in more than 100 international and national seminars and workshops. He prepared the style book for the ETV, Hyderabad and Glossary of Mass Communication in Urdu for NCPUL, New Delhi. He has also written the fortnightly column Going Native on Culture and Literature in the Hindu. He has been on the editorial board of several peer-reviewed journals and served in the governing bodies of various reputed organizations. Presently, he is working as Professor, Department of Mass Communication, Aligarh Muslim University. I welcome you, Professor Kidwai.
Thank you, Mrs. Gita Nishiraji. So I welcome all of you to the second session, because this second session has started half an hour late. We can also conclude this half an hour late. So we have 2 eminent paper presenters, and I request Dr. Monado, the first paper presenter, Sri Kalyan Raman, to make his presentation.
Thank you, Professor Shivaprakash. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my views on my domain of activity, which is English translation from Tamil to English, on the occasion of World Translation Day in Sahitya. My topic is translating in a multilingual environment, the case of English translation. Now, to start with the very obvious thing, India is a multilingual environment, and basically it consists of diverse linguistic communities, normally confined to a geographic region, or concentrated in a geographic region, and with their own landscape and with their own history, with their own culture, and there are some which are not, and the English-speaking community in India, this for instance is widely distributed across India, and it's a somewhat mythical community because each of those persons also comes from has a native Indian language, and also they somehow become monolingual anglophones. So we call them the English-speaking community in India. I mention this community because it plays a very important role in in the domain of English translation. Okay, the language of each community has a distinct contemporary literary tradition and an active culture of literary production in the modern sense. So you have Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, Bangla, all of them, Hindi, all of them produce their own, they respond to the modern world and the modern age with their own kind of literary production. They produce, novels, plays, poems, and so on. So they constitute the, which constitute the literary tradition in that language. And, more works are written out of that tradition. People come into that tradition and several communities or sub-communities within that, like Dalits and women and so on, fishermen, whatever their way of life is, they come into the literary culture for the first time and they also start producing literary works. This is the condition that we have. So to live as a nation, we must build on what is common between us. There are points on which we can build solidarity, and we should also make space for what is distinct about the other. To do both, we have to know, learn about, and understand one another. I mean, that is the only way we can do this. If we do it merely on the basis of ignorance or indifference, it's not going to work. Okay? And there are many ways to build this knowledge and this understanding, and in a multilingual environment. And one clear way to do that would be translation. So I believe that this is the public mission or purpose of translation in this country in the contemporary era. Now the translation itself is a solitary activity. There is a translator who sits down and he translates a text from the source language to the target language. Okay, there isn't very much involved. I mean, he may consult an editor, he may consult friends, he may consult dictionary, but it is a solitary activity. But the act of translation is enmeshed in a chain of processes that involve many people and institutions besides the translator. But the social existence of a translated text, it involves a very complicated chain of processes. And, which we may refer to as the translation ecosystem. And at the basic level, translation between two Indian languages from one language to another. It involves not just, it involves actually a relationship between the two communities. Usually it does. And I'll explain how. Between the source and the target languages. It is much more complex actually when we come to translating from an Indian language into English. And we will see about that in the course of this paper. But the generic processes that make up the translation ecosystem, they remain the same. And just so that everybody understands that we are on the same page, I'm going to give you a paragraph of what is well known. First, a literary work in the source language is selected and the translation of that work is commissioned by a publisher. The publisher also edits and publishes the translated text for distribution with the usual channels. I mean, now the channels have been multiplying. Bookshops, you sell to libraries, schools, you sell on digital platforms, you sell on e-commerce websites, the whole works. Now, the text is introduced, normally what happens is that the text is introduced to the reading public by critics who are actually representatives of the public and reviewers, etc. In the mass media, in newspapers, journals, magazines, online platforms, sometimes even television. So essentially the thing is that if a translated text is to be received by the public, then it has to be made known that then it exists. Okay. And so these are the methods or processes by which its existence is made known to a potential reading public. Based at least partly on such assessments, the book is bought and read by the wider community of readers in the target language. It becomes a part of the corpus of literature available to readers in the language and represents an enrichment of their collective epistemology. Yeah, this so much is fairly obvious, you know. I mean, we've been talking about how translations have changed the cultural history. I mean, in the modern era, even if it is somewhat more marginal than that, it certainly enriches, translated texts do enrich the cultural epistemology of the target language. You know, it may also be taught in schools, colleges and universities of this community. And in this way, it could also find a place in the ongoing literary and public discourse in that community. For instance, you know, there are certain iconic works of Dalit writing or feminist writing, for instance, which are cited by everybody, but they are essentially translated texts. You know, you take Asha Purna Devi or Mahashweta Devi's you know, works on tribal life and tribal struggles. Everybody reads about them and respond to them. You know, where similar struggles are going on, definitely those communities also are stirred or stimulated by such writing. It is the functioning of the translation ecosystem that determines the extent to which a translated text, or indeed the corpus of such text, achieves the larger public purpose of translating in a multilingual environment. Therefore, it is important to examine. So we have to keep that in mind when we talk about translation. You know, we talk about its history, we talk about the processes, we talk about the difficulties. We also have to talk about what is inelegantly called end use. You know, I mean, we'll talk about how it is received by the community and what role it plays today. Okay, and we can see how it does. And maybe if we can improve it, we can improve it. So that is the purpose of my talk today. I propose to look at English translation. I've been an active translator of Tamil text into English for over 20 years. I've worked with a wide range of editors and publishers. So I have some background and experience in how the ecosystem functions. So, I mean, you may contest some of what I say, but, you know, it can't be dismissed because it's been built up for a long time. My observations will be based on my own experience as well as what I've had the opportunity to observe. My purpose here is only to present and highlight certain serious challenges that may well affect the future of the translation project in this country. English translations in particular. Okay. First, I mean, I'm going to touch upon only 3 or 4 major aspects. So, first is the selection of text. We begin with how texts are selected for translation. Every linguistic community has a natural appetite for translated works. I mean, this is what our assumption is. And it is also, speaking of Tamil, is definitely true that it is, you know, it is part of the, one can say the driving, impulse of consciousness, so to speak. You know, people want to explore things which they don't have immediate access to, and they are excited by. You know, it's a theatre group in Tamil who is working in modern theatre. They hear about Mahesh Eklonchwar or Badal Sarkar. You know, they read about him in English and all that, and they want to enact, you know, those plays in Tamil. And this happens all across India. You know, the people are, and if there is if people are interested in the Dalit cause, then they do want to read about Gogu Shyamala, or they do want to read Namdev Dasal and so on in Tamil. So there is, and even Arundhati Roy is translated into Tamil. So there is a constant appetite for translation text. I can speak for Tamil and I can speak for Malayalam, and as this is commonly observed. Okay, that's a natural state. You know, it doesn't even have to be stimulated or anything. Among the reading public, definitely translated texts have a huge market, have a significant market at least. So the drive for translating comes from a host language community, from translators, writers, publishers, and critics. They become the champions of the work. So once the text is translated, there is a core community which actually champions its existence and champions its reception. Okay, promotes it by talking about it, by including it in the discourse, and talking about how important it is, and so on. The translation and publication done with full awareness of and respect for the stature of both the work and the writer in the source language. I mean, this is very important. That is, they know that Badal Sarkar is a great innovator and a genius of theatre in Calcutta, and same goes for Manish Shukla and so on. They know it. Okay, so this is something very important, and this is communicated to the readers of the Tamil translation. This works very differently in the English language, and I'll tell you why. Barring exceptions, the drive for translating a work comes not from the host language community, but from the source language. It is actually reversed. That is, it is because Tamil writers want to reach a wider audience. They would like their works to be translated. It's more, and Tamil publishers actually take up the cost for getting certain texts that they publish translated into English. So that is because translating into English is different in two levels. One is that the community that receives the translated text is very diffuse. I mean, it is so diffuse as to be a kind of sociological absurdity. You have the Anglophone people who read mostly world literature and Indian writing in English, and who read translated text at the margin. But you have people who are deeply engaged in their own linguistic community and with the literature of that community, but who would also like to read what other languages have produced, and so they read. But you can't put the two of them together at all. And there are middle level people who somehow landed up being monolingual Anglophones, and they want to bridge the distance they feel between themselves and Indian life as it happens, as life as it happens in Indian languages. So the community actually, it is said to exist, and it probably does, but no one can put a finger on it. So this is one part. So there is no champion of the English translations. There is no champion community there, except of course people on the supply side, translators, publishers, people who publish magazines, all of them. They champion it, but that's not the point. The point is about people who are receiving it, championing it. It's not there at all. They might talk about one or two works here and there, but that hardly makes a difference. So since the commissioning editors cannot possibly, and also another thing is that the commissioning editors in publishing houses, they can at the most belong to their own native culture, but the rest of the time they depend on what I call jokingly native informants. They have friends in the other communities, and it's a kind of second-hand knowledge. So they don't have the kind of engagement that comes from knowing the work and then choosing it for translation. So they are doing the best under the circumstances, but it's important to recognize the limitations of not using a wider and more transparent process with the host language community. What I would feel is that the best way to avoid the pitfalls of this particular situation is to involve the host language community. and say that what is the best work that you want to sort of transport to English so that you get a wider readership. And but this hardly ever happens. This hardly ever happens because people come to Delhi and push what they want. You know, it has become sort of natural, like a natural geological formation. There are also, natural sets of people who influence the selection. So this is something that we need to correct because it's not, it certainly doesn't serve the cause of the source language literature, because sometimes the best in the source language literature doesn't often, or some of the best doesn't get translated at all. In Tamil, for instance, there is a Dalit writer called Kumani. He's not he doesn't want to call himself a Dalit writer, but he's very eminent. And the classic, that he has written, which are they're about 30, 35 years old, and they are simply unknown outside Tamil. And that is the kind of thing that we should avoid. And Kidwai, who is the pioneer of the short story, and somebody who is actually venerated by the modern literary community in Tamil. He also doesn't have anything like a adequate translation in English. Similarly, there can also be distortions in the sense that there are some women poets who have got wide coverage in the Anglophone sphere. I think largely because of the necessity, when you conduct a kind of social discourse in English, and you want some evidence, if you conduct a feminist discourse in English, and you want some evidence from the hinterlands, then you do need, some pieces of literature from that from Tamil or Malayalam, etc. And therefore you translate and then you give it wide publicity and you give it a centrality. But this centrality really may not exist in the host language, in the source language itself. The source language may have its own kind of assessment, and it may, and it's far wider in fact than what these niche selections would allow. And therefore, this is another reason why we should consult the source language community, because I think Sahitya Akademi has its own way of doing it, because they have an office in all the state capitals, and if not all the state capitals, in most regions, So they have a way of doing it, but they have an advisory council for each language. But what happens in the private sector publishing house is something quite different. But they are the ones, who are more prominent in some way. For some reason, book journalism in this country kind of excludes Sahitya Akademi publication, but that is not. It's very problematic, but it is not something that I can say anything about, belonging to neither. So this is what I want to say. As far as selection is concerned, we need a mechanism for a wider consultative process. It can be, I can't draw the outline of this process, but it could, some cultural institution or university in the source language region might want to do it. And publishers are not, it's not like you're forcing them to choose among these, but certainly they can be guided by the possibility that they are guided by this is, by such a process is quite bright. And another thing is that if the general public comes to know that there are these works which are outstanding and there's a need to translate them into English, newer publishers may come in, or you can print on demand, etc. It can happen. It doesn't have to be from the Indian making of an MNC publishing conglomerate. You know, it can happen in so many ways, and it can open up. This process can open up those possibilities as well. The second thing I would like to talk about, and this is far more important than the selection process, is how translations are read and received. Shortcomings in the selection of works for translations can be made up in the long run, perhaps, but the more serious problem pertains to how English translations are reviewed and eventually read. We've seen that most linguistic communities have an appetite for translation from other languages, but whose needs are we fulfilling with English translations of literature in Indian languages? You know, this is something that is not clear to me at all. I haven't, seen any enlightening pieces of journalism or studies telling me that, who is the target audience for this. Even publishers don't talk about it very much. One of the reasons why they don't talk about it very much is that it is too small, too insignificant to talk about. So, most English translations sell at best, most of them. There may be some which are bestsellers, but most of them sell only about 500 to 1,000 copies over many, many years. So I would say that, as I've already said, this group is so widely diffused that we're meaningless in the category. It's also pitifully small in size. It is true that a large number of Indians who read in English can be potentially interested in reading outstanding literary works of their own country written in Indian languages. But that interest is not being created in an effective or meaningful way. In the sense that there are major writers in many Indian languages who are virtually unknown. They are unknown to the leading members of the English-speaking community. That is, and other people too. It is as though you don't have to sort of talk about them at all. There is no seeding of a potential leadership through the development of a critical discourse and through promotional infrastructure such as awards, festivals, launch events, and so on. Another problem is that most translations, even outstanding works in translation, they receive very few reviews. Okay, and this is one of the ways in which which people can get to know. People with discernment can get to know that here's a book worth reading, and why did I go and read? But the thing is that one of the reasons why I believe that there is no reviews. First thing is that when a translated work goes to the book editor of a newspaper or a journal, the person really doesn't know where it's coming from. He doesn't know who Ashokamitran is, or she doesn't know who Ashokamitran is, and therefore they have no idea of the state of the text, and they're very busy. They get 500, they get like 100 books every week, and therefore they don't make a judgment call at all. And then the second thing is, even if they do, they have to find the critics. Now, the problem is that there is some fundamental conceptual problem here, in the sense that if a Tamil literary text is translated into English, it doesn't become an English text. It remains a Tamil text available in English. Okay, so a person who is who writes in English, who is a critic in English, he or she will have to actually understand the context and the history of the text and the source language community in order to make that text intelligible to herself and then to the reading public. Otherwise, it's impossible. You can't read something like Shafey as a story. I mean, you have to know what the background is. And there are fewer and fewer people who are either willing or available to do this. And therefore, so you can simply say, and I've heard book readers say, oh, there's so many books, so we can't cover them all, there is so little space, and so on. So it is fine. I mean, from their point of view, it is probably justified, but what happens in the end of books, good books appearing and sinking without a trace is not, it doesn't serve the public purpose of translation, although we are producing it. So it is not sufficient to have the supply side hunger. You also have to be able to create that hunger in the reading public and produce the people or tap the people who can actually create that hunger. I mean, people who are equipped to write these reviews in English. So I would say that as far as translations are concerned, English translations are concerned, our reviewing system seems broken. Overall, it does a poor job of bringing important works of translation to the attention of the reading public. It is not clear what we can do about it, except to create new platforms, perhaps online, for reviews and invite a new crop of reviewers who are not only passionate about translated literature from Indian languages, but are also equipped to engage with it. We can also construct a searchable, today we don't even know, the average person doesn't even know who are the important writers in Tamil or Malayalam and what are their works which are available in translation over the past 50 years. So it's, unless this kind of knowledge is available in the public domain, how do we expect, people who don't belong to that language to actually develop a sense of that literary tradition and be able to read translations in a more enlightened, in a more enriching way. Normally when we read a book, when we read Shakespeare, we also know what Bacon, we also know what, where this thing comes from, where this text comes from. And similarly, even if you read Orhan Pamuk, we know about Turkey. If you read Saramago, we know about Salazar. I mean, that's inevitable. That is part of literary discourse. But and we don't have to sort of search for it because it is available to us. It's made available to us readily by the Western literary establishment and their compatriots in this country. But such a discourse is simply not available for English translations of literature from Indian language. And this needs to change. And the related thing is taking translation to the people. It is clear that a purely market-based approach to English translation is far from adequate, far from sufficient to take people. We need to talk about them in English. We need to be able to write essays or profiles or whatever in English in an interesting and engaging way. This is being done to a certain extent. But we need to do a lot more of this. Persuading college and university libraries to acquire the best of English translations published in the country could be a way to popularize the genre. At the same time, adoption of important texts as prescribed textbooks and higher education courses could be another. The genre of English translation must be promoted as vigorously as Indian writing in English was 30 years ago. About 30 or 35 years ago, Indian writing in English was also very marginal. Okay, I mean, people didn't even know that they could write. But then there was a relentless promotion of the genre in various ways, and so now you have at least the infrastructure for promoting it where it exists. Now the last is the role and status of translators. in the ecosystem, in the English translation ecosystem. It would be fair to say that English translations are not held in high esteem. Translations are not held in high esteem in our country. I mean, this is the problem. No translator after A.K. Ramanujan has been readable, or eminent Indian writers cannot hope to win Nobel Prize because they are poorly served by English translations. The quality of the existing translations is appalling. I mean, these are the kind of statements that appear in the press quite often by fairly eminent people. Now, these are comments, they are not quite valid, yet space is afforded for such comments if they come from the right quarters. On the other hand, I've never heard it said, and this is extremely important to me, never heard it said that India consistently produces a small number of good English translations year after year, even though it is true. Similarly, the fact that there are a set of translators who reliably produce good translations time after time is hardly ever acknowledged. You know, when you make a kind of value judgment on the corpus of English translation, you should have the honesty and the integrity to talk about good translation that exists. You know, no genre can be known by its worst, right? I mean, nothing can be known by the worst in that category. And so this is something that we need to do. We need to talk about good translations and about good translators so that people will actually be encouraged to enter the domain and contribute to it. So you keep dissing them all the time, it's not going to work. It's not good for the future of translation. Now, translators are the heart of the translation enterprise. Short of writing, and this has been said in many ways even earlier here this morning, short of writing the original text, they bring to the table everything that the author does and more. They work with two languages and straddle genres and generations of the text they have, which authors don't do even. Given their engagement with the literary milieu of the source language, they can contribute significantly to the discourse around translated text. They are also uniquely placed to persuade Indians who read in English to cultivate literary sensibility that can respond to Indian narrative and shift their epistemic frames from the English-derived one to more diverse ones. As practitioners and role models, they can and must play an important role in developing the next generation of translators. But the translation ecosystem itself seems to be indifferent to these possibilities and to translate. It is obvious that translators must take their place at the center of the conversation about translation instead of at the margin. After all, they are the only ones who can take translation enterprise forward in the most substantial and meaningful way. You know, you have many impresarios and whatever, you know, in the translation domain. But I think that translators have a much more meaningful role to play in that direction. Finally, I would like to close with you know, if you think that these are all remarks made by a disgruntled person, I would just like to quote the late Lakshmi Hanshaw. She was celebrated Tamil to English translator. She has said in an interview, there is more we can do about distinguishing between good and not so good translations, about the status of the source text that are being translated, about how translated texts are read, reviewed, and taught. Of course, a number of great Indian writers are not known in the rest of the world. It's not simply a matter of the lack of good, lively, creative translation of well-chosen authors, but the lack of mainstream publishers who will take them on and give them the publicity they deserve. These remarks confirm that the problems highlighted in the paper are long-standing ones, and they need to be addressed by all of us involved in the translation project, including translators, critics, and readers. I would like to add that a number of great Indian writers are not known even within India. And a project for Indian literature at home could be an idea whose time has come. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can take up this discussion after the next presentation. So I request you to complete another 20-25 minutes so that we can have discussion about 10-15 minutes, and so they can also speak for at least 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My small paper Urdu is specific. Much has been said about Act of Translation, Professor Professor Chaudhary, and right now Kalyan has spoken about the translation. My Act of Translation, my paper is on Urdu translation, translating in a multilingual society, and appraisal of transmutation in Urdu. This is a transmutation is a term that is used by Raman. So I just used the term and just analyzed the whole translation activity with the help of that term. Notwithstanding the dazzling galore of multiple narratives produced by the contemporary multilingual society, one has to communicate with people swayed by a sense of cultural and lingual superiority, and who also take pride in breaking down almost everyone's neck. The dream of speaking across culture and feeling of self-assurance and cultural aspirations elude the majority of people. Ever-increasing quest for self-fulfillment prompts us to seek solace from an activity known as, so many terms used for translation, known as translation or rendering or expression or transcreation or transmutation. Translation becomes central to our life, but serious doubts are also being raised over implications. Much maligned and equally acclaimed novelist Salman Rushdie, who has been gifted with a tremendous knack for subverting oft-repeated certitudes, made a pertinent observation about translation. Joining the issue with Robert Frost, whose one-liner, poetry is what is lost in translation, Salman Rushdie, through a character in his very famous novel, Shafey, says that it is true that something is lost in translation, but something is gained as well. The gain is actually provides a plausible justification of translation in a society that has an appearance of language galore, but in reality it has been inching towards monolingualism and monoculturalism. The scourge of uniformity, augmented by cross-commercialism, can only be thwarted if we set ourselves in initiating a dialogue with an author, poet or thinker who writes in a language that is not fully alive or partly known to us. Translation also takes place in our own language when we go through the writings of another author who writes in the language we speak. Here the premium is placed on laying hands at a semantic import of text, which Roman describes as transmutation. It aims at retaining semantic substance of the original without having much concern for stylistic feature or clap drop. Transmutation makes it clear that unerring adherence to the original and quest for finding formal equivalents hardly provides the translated text an opportunity to speak across cultures, and it was the reason that many culture-specific epics and sacred texts were allowed to be retold and adopted. One can find a plethora of translated texts that hardly pay attention to exactness in times gone by, and before the colonial rule, many Indian languages, including Urdu, never insisted too much on accuracy. Translators, armed with complete creative freedom, never shied away from modifying, interpreting the original to cater for cultural and aesthetic tastes of heterogeneous readers. Now in a multilingual society, it is generally perceived that straying even a little from the original makes the multi-layered text intangible. Deviation is fraught with hazards, and accuracy is the only index of the translator's competence. Can transgression be tolerated in a liberalized world we live in? This is the cardinal point related to translation, transcreation, adaptation, approximation, and improvisation. This has been made the object of a single Christian look at a time when translation, being considered an act of faith, faced several nuanced multicultural challenges. A discerning discourse actuated by the society draws heavily on culture tropes, and the speakers of the different language want to be an equal partner in cultural and aesthetic meaning of the text. Much touted espousal of the narrative of cultural and lingual plurality, the domination of one language symbolizing intellectual continuance of colonialism seems quite widespread. English, with its ever-expanding vocabulary, flexible grammatical structure, and universal market appeal, has emerged the most convenient and handy means of communication, and it hardly leaves space for any other language. English, fostered by new information technology, and market forces has become the only language around which the whole business of translation revolves. It's the language through which the bulk of translation is done. Translation, or in Jacobson's term, transmutation, has become English-centric across the globe. Globalization brings forth a tantalizing narrative of needs and mushroom growth of petty individual needs. Largely, it fails the concept of collective requirements. It makes us too possessive and self-centered, and we tend to keep ourselves away from the wider perspective of the society. We no longer want to be a part of an activity that fetches us no immediate dividends. Our vision of reality is shaped by mass media and all pervasive interactive social media. Entertainment-driven media has provided us with an alternative narrative mediascape. It is a term that has serious wider implications as it harps on homogeneity and sensual gratification of human desire. The term may remind us of a widely used term landscape, but it is a term that has become synonymous with our modus vivendi. Centrality of media in our lives takes heavy toll on nurturing intellectual attitude, and people tend to look up to media for everything they want. Constant privation on creativity, critical thinking, and ideological commitment counts makes the speaker of one language conscious of their dwindling intellect. Propagation of new ideas and ideological concerns coupled with the quest for deeper understanding of human psyche, all for seeking some stream through which one has to mold up his aesthetic sensibility, and this is what translation aims at. And languages start drawing their sustenance from cross-cultural fountains, and Urdu is no exception. In Urdu, translation as a literary discourse made its appearance as early as in 17th century, when a book from Arabic translated into Urdu in 1704. Shah Waliullah Qadri rendered Sheikh Mahmud's book in Urdu. At the beginning, translation was considered as individual activity, and its formative phase, Urdu got benefited from translations which were done from Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit. These translations were not translations in true sense, as they revolved around paraphrasing. In 1800, when Fort William College was set up, translation as an activity got institutionalized. Later, many institutions, Delhi College, Scientific and Translation Bureau, Osmania University, came into existence, and certain rules were laid. It was resolved that if words related to science has no equivalent in Urdu are to be used, the original is to be used. Sodium, potassium, chlorine are to be retained as there are no equivalents. Similarly, titles such as Sir, Bishop, Duke, and Collector must also be retained. If Urdu equivalent is available, one has to use it. Loha, Gandhar, and Wazir must be preferred to iron, sulfur, and minister. Compound words having both English words whose identical Urdu version is not available, English word must be used. Therefore, say 100 years ago it was that. No, it is not. These principles were adhered in 19th and 20th century, but with the advent of new information technology and cultural pluralism, the task became more arduous as Urdu, an aspiring product of shared legacy, no longer seems flexible as it was known to be. Efforts are being made us to borrow, now this is the trend, efforts are now being made to borrow liberally from Arabic and Persian languages as far as the use of new words are concerned. Highly personalized and Arabic words hardly make terms tangible, and instead of turning attention on common, place words of English, Hindi, and other Indian languages, Urdu and by large, right now opt for obscure terms and little known words. The biggest challenge Urdu faces from the speedy flow of new words dished out by television, radio, newspaper, social media, and online journalism. Frequently used terms denote new vision of reality wrapped in uneven semantic variations which are alien to Urdu. Mere repetition of some ornate Arabic and Persian equivalents will be of no use. National Council for Promotion of Urdu newly seems to be fully alive to challenges. Its new terminology of mass communication terms between presents a surprise. The book manifests demonstrates a new and rewarding approach towards finding Urdu equivalents of some widely used term. In English, new word faction, not a group but a combination of fact and faction, is frequently used by the media. LCPL terminology also finds a quaint term for it in Urdu. It is Waqsana, means just combination of Waqaya and Afsana. They put it and made a new word. So now it is a term that if you just look up some other Urdu newspaper, they go for translation available in Pakistan and say Iranian newspaper and Arabic newspaper. So what the point I am making is this kind of translation that we harp on that has to be adhered to. It is Waqsana, Waqaya, fact, and Afsana, fiction. They put together like faction, fact and fiction. Similarly, infotainment is called as Malu Fari. Malu, abbreviation word for Malumat, means information and knowledge, and Fari, shorter version of Tafri, it means entertainment. This sort of innovative approach is much needed in a multilingual society. In a postmodern society, translation is considered as an act that defies all accepted theories and strategies, as the translator tends to externalize someone else's vision expressed in different language in his medium of communication. Translator, no matter how much pain he takes, and rendering the text into another language is not always considered a part of creation, but a noted Urdu translator and editor of Urdu Alive, Aziz Parihar, says that translation and transmutation is essentially a collaborative creative endeavor which has many partners like author, reader, speaker, and translator. Bezar Bach, another translator who translated many prominent Urdu poets such as Rabindra, Akhul Imam, Sadar Jafri, Shahriyar, and Majid Sultanpuri into English is of the view that even in a language galore, accuracy is to be reckoned as the sole canon, because as a translator, he aims at presenting the creations of the poet as they are. Beautiful translations, such as Ferozeshah's translation referred to of Kalyan, stands on their own as works of art. They don't have to be faithful to the original, but one has to be Ferozeshah to transcreate beautifully. Does a multilingual society make the accuracy the object of attention up to a considerable extent? Yes. But the insistence on accuracy does not go well with Appa Panikar, a prominent scholar and exponent of Indian poetry. He asserts, in the 19th century, Indian translators were not affected unduly by the anxiety of being alive to the original in letter and spread. All through the Middle Ages, Sanskrit classics like Quran continued to be retold and translated, and the features of the target language and the taste of the target readers at the time of translation are among the factors that promoted freestyle translation. The question of authenticity only becomes central with the beginning of attempts to translate the Bible into Indian languages. He regrets that the accuracy has now become an obsession, and literary flavor got only a second or third place. If the purists had their way, we would have never enjoyed the works of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, he observes. Urdu has an uninspiring tradition of translations, and all major works of literature belonging to various languages have been rendered into Urdu through the medium of English. A close look at translated texts both in verse and prose available in Urdu makes it clear that Urdu translators did attempt to add local cultural flavor, if possible, to the intended meaning of the original text, and this is what Roman Jacobson described it as transmutation. A number of Urdu writers and poets have been rendered into English, and translation from Urdu into English calls for equal command of both languages, literary traditions and cultural specification. In order to provide a peep into massive translation operation that is going on in Urdu, English and some other languages, English translation of one poet, then Shahriyar is somewhat I will recite. Shahriyar's laconic and sometimes unfinished poems indicate an inadequate silence that manifests itself in the transitory dreams-like situation. To make the readers aware of the densely textured poem of the poet, eminent scholar Professor Raman, in collaboration with David Paul, Douglas rendered several of his poems in Urdu. Shahriyar's poem is still live in Urdu. It is Sukut. Creates a deep sense of frightening silence, which is impeccably captured by the translator. Urdu poem है और Urdu नज़्म का नाम है सुकूत, फूल पत्तियाँ और शाखें लब होंठ और हाथ, मौजूद तू सदाए दिल, चांद सूरज मुंजमद है सब के सब, लगता है वक्त की तमाम याद कोई तीही नहीं कोई. The how it is rendered into flowers, leaves, eyes, lips, hands, eyes, wave of blood, hard sound, moonlight, sun, all those are frozen in the bow of time. There is not a single error. This aside, translation in Urdu indicate a new state of creativity that juxtaposes different cultural traditions to produce a tangible text. This is what exactly a multilingual society demands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shafey. I think we had two presentations and they complemented each other. Mr. Kalyan dwelt on the contemporary translation practices, particularly translation of Indian language texts into English. But his paradigm was what is now considered to be translation. Whereas Professor Shafey Kidwai took us further back. He pointed out this obsession with accuracy is a post-colonial obsession. I think that's important. We should look at another paradigm for translation. And before I say a few things about this, I invite questions on the two people presented and for discussion. So I invite questions. We can have discussion for about 15 minutes. Yeah, please.
This should take forward suggestions made by Dr. Kalyan, Raman. I think we've had a very fruitful morning altogether because we're looking for new paradigms, as you just said. And following from Professor Shivaprakash, using the word assimilation and then talking about a new history, I want to pick up with you, this idea of the ecosystem. It seems to me that so far many of us have been looking at translation as an isolated, lonely activity, as a receiving act rather than being aggressive and campaign-like. So when you're talking about ecosystem and you're talking about the broken links in the chain exists, but it really is not even broken, it's just isolated and fragmented. So don't you think that a more aggressive, more proactive manner of promoting translation, particularly since you are working with Tamil, which is one of the richest languages that we have, don't you think that a more proactive stance is required? Take the example of Ashoka Mittal that you cited and the book review that you especially mentioned. Did anyone take the trouble to write to the reviewer of the book review to say, look, you're not doing this? If they did and they didn't get an answer, I can say, okay. But maybe some of us have to take on that campaign mode. We don't have to be the translator ourselves. So today we're looking at Translation Day. Maybe we should look at aggressively going into the market, into the media, into public space, into newspapers, and talking about the need to popularize and extend. Because I agree with you that the spots exist. University syllabi all now have translation studies. And some publishers are also coming up with good titles. But what do they look at? They first want a famous translator. Then they will decide whether they will look at the book or not. I'm talking of the ecosystem. So what would be your thoughts, or if the chair would want to speak something about it, how do we actually make this into a campaign to promote translation?
Okay, the remarks that I made this morning were from the point of view of the translator. Okay. But you know what I found the pain points of being a translator. But exactly how to divide, I can only arrive at the need for a more vigorous campaign or more popularizing. But as a translator, I am not myself capable or competent to, except in a kind of layperson way, to make that work. But the need for it, I am quite clear that there is the need for a more honest and open-minded approach to translation by the people in the ecosystem itself. It's only then that will go to the public. Thank you.
Yes, first this was a
Yeah, thank you. Now, I just seek some kind of explanation or maybe information from my side from Professor Kidwai, who presented some very succinct points. One is, sir, I've always been very interested in different terms that are different languages used for translation. In Urdu, we use the term tarjuma, which is basically razam, that is interpretation. How far has translation in Urdu gone from the original sense to the practice or the concept of translation under Western influence? That would be one. Second thing, like you mentioned, the institutions like NCPUL preparing glossaries and dictionaries. I believe that they do help quite a bit as tools for translation. But as far as literary translation is concerned, literary translation is supposed to create some language also through this. So by following dictionary, possibilities of some language might decrease. So these are the two things I thought that I should request.
And you rightly pointed out, the Urdu, the translation is known as tarjuma. Tarjuma is the Arabic word which means tarjumani, interpretation. It's not just literal way of saying things, so you have to add a bit something. So in Urdu, that's why we have a word for tarjuma. Tarjuma means actually spokesperson. So that's why tarjuma is not retaining the actual words. The word I just referred to in Urdu, whatever the translation I have seen, they add a lot of local color. It's not just literal translation, so just make it tangible to the people who are not aware of their cultural specification of one language. They just did it. And as for the second point is concerned, yes, the literary translation is NCPL has also published a dictionary for literary terms. I'm not talking about that. I said what the words are, new words are coming up, how to translate them. In Urdu, the trend is, unfortunately, the trend is not the Urdu just looking up to some term that is used as highly personalized in Arabic. So what I suggest, there are so many commonplace words are available in some other Indian languages and English language that should be used. That's why I just given the two examples. Now this is the example if you just look up dictionary published by the Pakistan or Pakistan Muqtadara is known as like that, they have done different variations. So my point is if you translate it, yes, then these sort of terms, yes, you are using new words. We were just involved in that and while doing this work. They said this new word, Baksana is no word, Wakya and something, you can't make it. If the word exists, there is no point to have another committee to form a word. So these are the new trends. I would suggest that this kind of words, new words are coming up. For that, the Urdu, the original Wahiduddin Salim and so many other people were there, they laid down some canons of translation that are not to be adhered to. So with accuracy, the point I just made it, some people nowadays Urdu says no, you can't add something. So many purists are around, they think no, you have to stick to accuracy. That's why in Urdu reference I just made this a point.
Yes.
I really appreciate what you have to say about pluralism, and
Please, Mike.
oh sorry, somebody else. I appreciate what you said about pluralism. I think it's very important. We should stop being purists in matter of language, totally, because this is, as you said, a whole Sanskritic place, and that's the first thing we have to remember. And I was very interested to hear how they are doing these things. And you have pointed out the adverse impact of the other kind of translation. In Tamil, I think we have moved quite a bit from that aggressive purism which we went through also. And it's the more and more we talk about one language and how things are untranslatable, that's clearly giving up before you start. I don't want to talk about anything as untranslatable as long as I'm a human, because I must communicate. So I have to translate and I have to communicate. And this is going to happen. I was very interested to hear what Raman has to say about the ecosystem and how very difficult it is for translations to be recognized for what they are. And frankly, I'm a little disappointed with Sahitya Akademi. I must say that it isn't enough. somehow I don't know what your institutional problems have been, what the ecosystem for you in government has been, and I had really hoped, and I still hope, that Sahitya will shake off all its shackles and going into this aggressive thing that you're talking about, this positive thing that you're talking about to promote translation and all the languages of India. They should be. And yeah, I know it's a very big job. It's very difficult. You can't do it by yourselves. Most important thing is, as a community and as a country, we have to realize what we have done to education. We have not allowed languages to be taught in our country as they should be. No wonder we are Anglophone, some of us, talking to each other. And we're not able to, I had to discover my own mother tongue in my teens. It required a different set of resources, not everyone can do it. We are really not sensitive to our own treasure of language. It's not a problem, it's a treasure. We have been thinking of it as a linguistic problem, language problem. We just have to stop this. And our children are growing up ignorant of it. And we have not been able to do anything about it. It's a bigger problem of education here in this country, where we really sit and talk among ourselves, chatter to ourselves, and we have really left out the vast majority of children who need, and other people who need to know our languages. We have starved them of that. And this is our basic lack of commitment to our own Sanskritic culture, our country. And this, I think, is very important. That's what I feel strongly about. And as for media could do a great deal. And I think there are, to give them credit, there are many in our media in India who are very sensitive and aware, because their job is to be in touch with everyone and listen to every word. And then they are translators. But they also pick up those issues which are important. Or suppose a book here, you have Perumal Murugan, for example, the Tamil writer who was in the news, has been in the news. And he was picked up because he's great, he's a good writer, very good writer. He's picked up because he touched a nerve, a social nerve, caste. So, I mean, a general interest in literature will come from a society which is wanting to have knowledge spread, but that's we pick up issues selectively in the media, which is not quite good.
Yeah, hi. Just a couple of things. It's actually, I don't really have a question, but I'm very happy if you could comment on them also. About the ecosystem that you spoke about, Kalyan. We have to, I agree with most of the things you said, but I have a problem with the way that you're approaching it, because I think translating into English is in a different category altogether. Translating within the non-English Indian languages is much easier because you're not translating the culture. But you are translating the culture when you're translating it into English, because the words have their own, they bring their own cultural connotations. So that's a completely different kettle of fish. And I think we need to also recognize that English is a power language, it's a world language, it strides through India like a giant. It's not comparable to the other languages. What we need to do is we need to embrace Indian English as ours, and we need to do it in our own way, which we have failed to do, because we each in our own way believe that we are actually speaking or writing the Queen's English, which we are not. So, but what I need to understand myself is whether we can have this ecosystem which actually exists in a market economy. When we are talking about translating into English, we are talking about a market economy which will support it. The translations we have are market driven. Therefore, we can never actually ask the host language, the target language audience, to give us names of people that they want translated, because they won't. They will give us names of people that they are used to, and those are the important writers. You said important writers we don't know. How do you define an important writer? Today, Litfests are defining important writers. And when Litfests define important writers, writers become a performing artist. If you are a performing artist, you go to Litfest. If you stammer, you cannot speak, you break into a cold sweat, you're ugly, you're old, you do not go to Litfest. I'm sorry, never mind what you write. So those are the important writers. Change the way you look at importance, okay? So we do get the writers of importance today. Unfortunately, a lot of them, according to us old-timers, would be mediocre writers, right? That's something we have to take. If we want the writers we think to be important to come into the picture, then we need to go on pushing from the source language, because nobody other than the source language people have the knowledge. The target language can never give you that kind of passion with which they will ask for a writer.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I said.
You said we need to create the need from the target language.
Source language.
Source language. Yeah.
But you were saying host language. You said that it should come from the host.
Host language. Okay.
You can say host language.
Source language. Sorry.
Source language, if you said that, I have no quarrel. But I thought you were saying host language because you were saying host language, which is the target language. So that's the other. And the other thing,
what I really said was, I agree with you in the sense that certain kinds of Litfest and so on, we are picking up writers depending on the exigencies of their discourse, the English language discourse, like Bhawan, because he was not the first person to write about a car in Tamil.
No, and also the reason that he came into the English language discourse was not because of his writing, it was because of a political act.
Because of an event. Yeah.
A political act, and that was picked up by political newspapers as a political guide much later than it actually happened also, you must admit. But the other thing, when you talk about the literature at home, actually Sahitya Akademi, it has been, we always, because Sahitya Akademi has done so much, we are always very happy to say bad things about them, because the more you do, the more you have an opportunity to be criticized. They have been doing a lot of work earlier, and also there was this Adan Pradan thing, the translation within languages that, NBT did it. So it was a government, it was pushed by the government, although these are all autonomous institutions, I don't want to get into that, but there was this very clear push about literature at home, which you talk about through the Adan Pradan thing, which I think is it's a shame that it's not there now. Does it still exist? Does anybody know that it exists? Yeah, see, we do, even if it exists, it's not doing much, clearly. So that is a question of reviving it. And I basically think we need to look at translating into English as an evangelist. We have to, it is not for the market, it's not for commercial reasons, it needs to fulfill a need that each of us have for literature, each of us has for literature. And there, I think what Professor Kidwai was talking about, the authenticity versus the beauty, the readability issue comes in again, because if we do talk about making it market friendly, then we do have to let go of authenticity as we knew it in that way. Although how much we will go in the direction of transcreation as it was once known is obviously up to us. So I just think that we need to look at it not as a commercial thing, but as a passion.
I have one
So glad
observation.
the questions that you mentioned serving us. One more question.
You want to wind up? No.
If you have a question.
I had a point which is really taking up something which Antara Devshan said a while ago. This is a point which I think should come up in the course of the discussion today, so let me introduce it, which is the idea that Indian literature should be translated in a special kind of Indian English. Now, I know this is something you hear very widely, that now English is so well established in India and a certain distinct kind of Indian English is recognized, so we should use that. Now, I'm afraid I have serious problems with that attitude. Because, of course, Author said, we think we write in Queen's English, and out of there, anybody thinks we write in Queen's English this way. There is a kind of, however, relatively geographically neutral international English, which has now taken over, I suppose, the single other biggest influence is probably American. But it's a language in which, a version of English, which educated persons using the language all over the world, both those whose mother tongue it is and those whose mother tongue it is not, they use it. And I think, in a general way, when translating the material, especially the prose, in any Indian language into English is concerned, that is the register we should use. Because what do we mean by Indian English? If we use Indian terms for Indian objects, that of course means, I said something about it in my own presentation, that you don't have to translate a sari as a dress. You translate it as a sari. You don't translate it as we use the word sari. If you talk about rasgulla, you talk about rasgulla. It doesn't have to be made into a pudding or anything like that. But that is one thing. But when it comes, that is the use of Indian terms for Indian objects or even maybe Indian ideas. But the full linguistic structure of Indian English is actually just something structural. It relates to particular uses of grammar, of idiom, some of them translated out of one Indian language or other, some of them not even existing in that form in an Indian language to my knowledge. It may, of course, be other Indian languages to my knowledge. But the problem with using that kind of English is that, although many Indians might use that English, even they recognize it as being in some sense non-standard. So that if you translate standard Hindi or Bengali or Marathi or Tamil into that kind of English, you create a kind of twist. You give an impression in the English which is not created by the original. And that ultimately any reader, let's say even readers who are used to reading standard English, even if they don't speak it, write it themselves, they usually look down on that kind of English. They think it is a somewhat inferior product. And this is still more the case with readers abroad, whose mother tongue is English or know English well from the perspective of Europe or America. We often hear it said, people like Salman Rushdie have made Indian English popular. But Salman Rushdie puts this distinctly Indian English on the lips of characters whom he's treating with more or less of patronization, humor. See, for his own third person narrative, he uses standard English, more or less. So this deliberate cultivation of a non-international standard of Indian English is, I think, going to create more problems than it solves, and is going to give a seriously wrong and somewhat limited impression of Indian literature in translated into English actually.
So I just need to conclude because I'm very happy with the questions and questions have been as meaningful in the presentation themselves. Thank the audience participants for it. I was just wondering, just now Antara spoke about how to translate between literatures, what kind of English. When I met Ramanujan for the first time, after he translated his book Shiva, I asked him, why did you translate Channamallikarjuna into Lord as White as Justice? Why Purava Sangamadeva, Lord of Meeting Rivers? He said, look, if I retain the same words in English, when these English people in Chicago, when they speak these words, they distort it. It breaks their heart to hear that. So he was trying to make it as friendly to the tongue of the English speaker as possible. I said, in that case, Ramanujan sir, your name should also be translated into English as the younger brother of the handsome one. So with that note, I was also just wondering, how do you translate the word? How have we been translating the word translation into our Indian languages? Just now this Tarjuma from Urdu mentioned. When I go back to Kannada, I don't see the word Anuvada, which is some kind of translation of translation into Kannada. It's a post-colonial affair. But the history of Kannada literature from 9th century onwards has been a history of translations. Our Adikavi Pampa translated a great Sanskrit epic Purva Purana into Kannada, called Adi Purana. He does not use the word translation. During the medieval period, the greatest translator of Mahabharata, Kumarivasa, is not aware of the word Anuvada. He talks about Karnataka Bharata Katha Manjari. He says, I'll give you the Manjari, the essence of the Mahabharata. As late as early 20th century, when the Gangadhar Madiwal Turimari, a schoolmaster from somewhere in North Karnataka, translated Manabhatta's Kadambari to Kannada, he didn't call it translation, he called it Kannada Kadambari. The translation of Shakuntala, not Shakuntala. Vaswami Shastri, one of the next translators, Kannada Shakuntala. And the word, some of our pre-modern poets use for translation, is not Anuvadisu, which is the translation of the translation, Kannadisu to Kannadais. Kannadisu also needs to be done. So, I think we are too much bogged down in the contemporary practices of translation, which are inspired by a certain kind of paradigm that emerged after the colonial contact. This obsession with how much fidelity should be there for the original and how, to what extent one should be free from it, this never bothered pre-modern writer translators. So, we are, because we have already been translated to Anglocentric and Eurocentric concept of translation. We are completely given in because we translated history into the history, or sociology into the sociology. We are not only we have deprived ourselves of looking at many other possibilities of translations which we find in pre-modern India. And I think in the morning session, Professor Singh talked about it, how we need other concepts of translation. And we've been talking about the translation in the multilingual context. The multilingual context is not a context where there's this plurality of languages. There is also a hierarchy of languages. For example, if you look at pre-modern India, a work on poetics like Dunyaloka, which is a seminal work, very important work, has been translated to all Indian languages. But an equally important work on poetics, Tolkappiyam, has not even been translated into any South Indian language excluding Malayalam. There is no Kannada translation, no Telugu translation to Tolkappiyam, let alone translation into North Indian languages. Only in the second part of 20th century, English translations of this text have appeared. So, it is a situation of unequal exchange. In this situation of unequal exchange, we not only translate according to the terms of this unequal exchange, we also conceptualize translation according to the terms of this unequal exchange. So this, I think, we should remember. And Professor Kalyan was talking about the problems of translation, circulation of translation, distribution of translation, in a situation where translation activity is becoming market dominated. And how to change this? My question is, are we translating for the market? Are we translating for others? We have to learn from our pre-modern translators that ultimately we're not only writing poetry for Swanta Sukhaya, for our own delight, even translation we are doing for our own joy. When Pampa translated Adi Purana, the story of Adinatha Kannada, he was not meant to please the king. When he translated the Mahabharata, where he compared Arjuna to his king, his patron, there was something missing because when he did Adi Purana, it was for his own delight. He said, I'm not doing the commentary on Asani, the Palamanalu. Oh, what does one expect from poetry? Puja, adoration, negalte, fame, renown, labha, profit. Palamagini Pramani, the Kami, won't one get something beyond all this through the remembrance of the greatest Jina, Adinatha Kannada? So, this need to be involved in translation with this kind of personal passion, that is very important. And market analysis come later. I mean, we can't control the outcome of our translations. For example, Raman translated Anantamurti Samskara. It had a lot of impact. Of course, I still believe that Anantamurti Samskara is not one of the best novels of Kannada. It's one of the above mediocre novels of Kannada. So, something that sells for forever. That's a different thing. He also translated Tamil Sangam poetry for poems of Raman Ward. He also translated Tamil Vaishnava poetry, Hymns for the Drowning. But why was it that his speaking of Shiva had much greater outreach and impact than the others? So much so, Raman told me, he was targeting English-speaking audiences on both sides of the Atlantic. But this had a tremendous impact on Latin America. There were innumerable pirated editions, pirated translations of this text, which were distributed all over Latin America. So something clicks somewhere, something strikes a chord somewhere. We have no control over this. Ultimately, like poetry is something that belongs to certain layers. So we leave it at that. And also, in the morning, Professor Vishnu Singh pointed out that if we rethink our translation theory and practice, we can write a new history of literary culture. I will go further and say that if we reconfigure our concepts of translation, we not only write a new history, but we can create a new history. Because the history that we are now creating is a translation of the Eurocentric concept of history into our languages. Because of our history, where was it in our languages? In our language we have the whole traditions of Charitra, Charita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Siddharama Charitra, etc. What they are here talking about is not the objective life story of a person or a period. It is the way a particular human self evolves through time. It's something akin to the other meaning of Charitra, that is Swapower. So I think we can shed new light on our understanding, practice understanding of translation in the light of how we understood translation before colonialism came, how we understood history before colonialism came. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivaprakash and our paper readers, Kalyan and Shafey, Kidwai. It has been a very interesting session and many new points regarding translations were raised. And we would now break for lunch, and I request you to be here by 2:15 because we are really running behind